Welcome to week 5 of Church Life 101, the importance of fellowship, community, and local church. This is part of our gather and grow. There's a story of an old rabbi who asked God to show him heaven and hell. God told him that he would show him hell first. Inside a large room was a dining table. In the middle of the dining table was a large pot of delicious smelling stew. The room was filled with starving, emaciated people. The people in this room were equipped with long-handled spoons. They were able to easily dip the stew out with their spoons, but they were still starving. You see, the spoon handles were longer than a person's arm, and they were not able to get the stew to their mouth. Then God showed the rabbi heaven. It was a similar scene. A room, a table, a pot of stew, people with long-handled spoons, and yet these people were different. They were well-nourished. They were laughing. They were talking with one another. Everything was the same, except the people in heaven had overcome the problem of the long-handled spoons. That old rabbi looked puzzled, and then God explained it to him. They have learned to feed each other. Here's what the rabbi learned. Selfishness collapsed the whole system. Selfishness creates the problem in the first room, and selfishness perpetuates that problem permanently. Serving one another and considering others before ourselves actually helps to foster friendship, relationship, and community, especially in the local church. Now, I don't believe that I need to spend a great deal of time convincing you of that. Fellowship, and I want to use the term community here alongside fellowship, is absolutely essential to the life of a healthy church. The Greek word alelon occurs about 100 times in the New Testament. That word is translated various ways, but often it's translated as one another or each other, speaking about life in the church. Around 59 times the word is attached to a command. Most of those commands are positive commands. Love one another, serve one another, be devoted to one another, bear one another's burdens, consider others better than yourselves, be patient with one another, forgive one another, accept one another, encourage one another. And the list just goes on. And it really concerns the life in the church. Fellowship, community has always been an important part of God's creation. Even from the earliest days of creation, think about this for a moment. God said it was not good for Adam to be alone. Adam had a relationship with God. He was surrounded by a perfect world with plants and animals, and yet he was considered to be alone. So God created Eve and told them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The people formed societies, communities, and ultimately nations. People live in a symbiotic relationship in this world, relying on one another so that we can survive. Very few of us can say that we built our own house. We grow our own food. We do all of our own repairs on the vehicles that we even made. We generally do one or two things well, and we rely on others for what we're not really that good at or skilled at. The same is true in the church. From its earliest days, the fellowship in the church was a priority. Think of the book of Acts with me for a moment. The church met in various locations. They met at the temple in Jerusalem in large groups, but they also met in their homes. You wonder, how large were those groups? Well, New Testament scholars are pretty much in agreement that a home during that time would hold about 15 to 20 people. So what we see is the early church met in a large meeting, and they also met in smaller groups of people for fellowship and community. Now, here's the principle that teaches us. As the church grows larger, and it did in the book of Acts, it must grow smaller at the same time in order to maintain that fellowship and community. Remember Acts chapter 2, verse 42. Remember Luke tells us, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and the breaking of bread and the prayers. Now remember, this was no small thing for the church to be devoted. They were dedicated to all of these things, including to the fellowship. Think about that name just for a minute, that word fellowship. This fellowship was what the church was called at the time, but it was also part of what the church did. All of the one another passages that I mentioned earlier apply right here in the fellowship, in the community of the church. So you as a Christian, you don't need to be taught that fellowship is important. You experience this, you feel it, you long for it as a believer. One of the reasons church hurt is so real and so bad is because of the joy and comfort that comes from community in the church. So when the New Testament gives us the negative commands regarding community like these, don't bite and devour one another, do not slander one another, we can understand why those commands are there. You see, to disobey the positive commands is to harm the fellowship just as much as biting and devouring one another is harmful to the community. And here's one thing about the early church that we need to emulate. As the Lord blesses our local church with new people were simply welcomed into the community. Now, I want you to consider with me Acts chapter 2, verse 46 through 47, and see what the Lord was doing. It says, and day by day attending the temple together, there's that large group, and breaking bread in their homes, there's that small group, they received their food with glad and generous hearts. Verse 47, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. The early church experienced massive growth, and yet they were able to assimilate, to incorporate all of these new believers into their group, into their midst. How did they do that? Here's how. This is the principle. Genuine Christian love creates intentionality in bringing new people into the community. This should lead us to consider others before we consider ourselves. Remember, while the local church exists to care for her members, we also exist to reach our geographical area for Jesus Christ. And if we only consider how best the members can be served, we neglect our calling and command from Jesus Christ in the Great Commission. Plus, you and I have the second greatest commandment to love our neighbors as we love ourselves as well, don't we? So if we love others as we love ourselves, should we not want them to have the same or similar experiences of community and fellowship that we have? Well, of course we would. But one of the biggest obstacles that churches face in actually fostering community for new people is selfishness. Just like the story that I told you in the beginning. We're often so worried about our own perceived needs that we cannot see the needs of others around us. And sometimes we're so comfortable in the way things are that we're neglectful of what goes on around us and are even uncaring toward the people that happen to visit the church. You know, there are really two reasons that you and I should be actively involved in fostering fellowship and community in the local church. Let me give you that first reason. We need the community. We need this fellowship. We need this community. Why do we need it? Because God has created us this way. And the second reason, others need this community as well. That's right. Others need this community as well. If it benefits us, it will benefit so many other people as well. So if we as a church begin to think beyond our own perceived needs and our own preferences, we'll begin to consider others and their needs. In the book, Building the Body, Gary McIntosh and Phil Stevenson give us really a whole list of questions that we should be regularly asking regarding people coming into the church. And it really all centers around this big question. And that is, does the church have room for me? Does the church have room for me? And what they point out is that one of the reasons that people stay at a local church is because they find there a loving community of people. So how do they do that? And here's where we run into issues as we've been in church for a long time. And so we become very comfortable with the people that we know. And it's human nature to have a small group of friends that we regularly fellowship with. In order to communicate to people coming into the church that the church has room for them, you and I must practice hospitality. Hospitality. From the parking lot to the pew and then back to the parking lot after the service is when and where we practice biblical hospitality in the church. Now, imagine somebody visiting your home for the first time. You've given them the address, they put it into their GPS, they found their way there, they pull into your driveway, they get out. They're not sure what door they should knock on when they get there. So there's some apprehension already. Then they find out where to enter and you meet them at the door. Maybe you planned a meal, but that person has never been to your table before. They've never been to your house. And so they begin to ask questions of, where should I sit? And they're asking this to themselves oftentimes. And what if they sit in somebody else's seat? Again, there's some stress related to this visit. But imagine instead you met them in the driveway when they arrived. You greeted them and you demonstrated that you were happy that they were visiting. You took them inside your home. You showed them around. You even pointed out where the restrooms are. And you made them feel welcomed and at home. And when dinner was ready, you told them to sit in any chair that they liked, or you even had a place already picked out for them and you made that known some way. You see how it was a lower stress event for sure because you demonstrated great hospitality? This is where the members of the church initiate true fellowship and community by offering great hospitality to that person or that family that's visiting the church for the first time. You see them. You see them in the parking lot and you recognize it. You don't know them. You don't know that person. You don't know that family. So you walk up to them and you welcome them and you introduce yourself and you offer to show them where everything is. You even ask them to sit with you. And when you walk in with them, you introduce them to people that are standing there greeting. You ask them questions about themselves that are really non-intrusive. And you say good things about the church. We may do a whole lesson on hospitality soon, but you get the point. You see, true fellowship starts with hospitality, but it doesn't end there because fellowship has a great purpose in the church. So what is true biblical fellowship or community? And I want you to get this definition. It's in an article written by Grace Theological Seminary on the fellowship itself. And it uses the Greek term koinonia, which is the Greek word for fellowship or community. And here's what the writer states. Koinonia, fellowship community, describes the unity of the Spirit that comes from Christians' shared beliefs, convictions, and behaviors. When those shared values are in place, genuine koinonia, biblical fellowship, occurs. You see, this fellowship produces our mutual cooperation in God's worship, God's work, and God's will being done in this world. Recall with me the story that I opened the section with. Remember the differences between the two rooms? One group was focused upon themselves and their needs, and the other group was concerned about one another. So what's needed in order for a church to have real fellowship and community? What do we need? Well, number one, people need to have a sense of belonging. People need to have a sense of belonging. Relationships in the church must not be merely superficial. They have to be meaningful. The church has to become your people. Many people, when they come to Christ, lose friends and family. This was certainly true of the first century congregations, and it's becoming more true for us in the 21st century as well. Furthermore, we live in probably the most disconnected time in American history. Social media has largely taken the place of social interaction, and often a scroll through the social media platform is all of the social interaction that people get on a daily basis. Certainly the church should be a stark contrast to that. We are definitely not going to put social media, that genie, back in the bottle. It's here to stay for the foreseeable future. But the church has to foster true community in order to be a place where people can belong. Number two, people need to have a sense of purpose. They need to have a sense of purpose. Remember that the purposes of the church, the purpose for the church existing, 6 of them: worship, discipleship, fellowship, service, outreach, and evangelism. And at Faith Church, the way we put these into practice is through doing what our mission statement teaches. We gather, we grow, we give, and we go. Our overall purpose is to worship the triune God, and as we are transformed and we are being transformed, we seek to obey the Great Commission to make other disciples. And part of our purpose is personal spiritual growth. And you know where that happens best? In a community of other like-minded believers who are committed to Christ, committed to one another, and committed to ministry together to reach those around us. Number 3, people need to have a knowledge of what's expected of them. People need to have a knowledge of what is expected of them. Here at Faith Church, we ask all members to do 3 things. We ask them to attend church regularly. It's very important in your spiritual growth. Number 2, participate in a grow group. Again, that is so important in your discipleship, and that could be a small group. It could be what happens on Sunday morning. Number 3, serve in a ministry. There's a list of ministries at Faith Church that you can get involved in. Those are the expectations. And the reason we believe that these should be the expectations is because this is what the Bible teaches us to do. And these are the most effective means of Christian growth. And we do these things together, in fellowship, in community with one another. Number 4, people need to play a part in planning the future ministry of the church. People need to play a part in planning the future ministry of the church. You know, the pastors and the elders, they never have all the good ideas for ministry. Here's why. We believe what Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12 teaches. Notice the passage with me. And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, the teachers, to equip the saints, the church, for the work of ministry. What's the work of ministry? For building up the body of Christ. So if we all are to do the work of ministry, then we can all have great ideas and be a part of the planning for the future ministries of the church. And often the best ideas come out of small groups that meet together regularly, and the Lord opens their eyes to a particular need. One of those needs was brought to me by 2 ladies in our church. I'd just gotten here. We were in the middle of COVID. People were dying. And from what the news was telling us at the time, there were going to be plenty more. I heard about a ministry called Grief Share, and I began to pray about someone to start that ministry here at Faith Church. I happened to be in the copy room one day, and one of those ladies was making copies. We talked, and then she asked me a question. Pastor Joe, have you ever heard of Grief Share? Well, the rest is history. We've had, since that time, shortly after that time, an ongoing Grief Share ministry where those ladies and some men have been ministering to those who have lost loved ones. You know, there are plenty of other ministries to people that need to be started at Faith Church. And remember that whatever the Lord takes us through in your life, he's often going to use that to prepare us to serve and minister to others who have experienced very similar things. The leadership at Faith Church are always interested in good ideas for serving our community, serving one another. Number 5, people need a challenging church. People need a challenging church. Not a comfortable church, not a place where there are no expectations, not a place where everything is easy. I mean, we preach doctrine here. Sometimes difficult doctrine has to be proclaimed from the pulpit and even in the classes and the groups of the church. But then there has to be space, right, for people to work through that doctrine. So ministry also should be challenging. I want you to remember what true ministry is. Always keep this in mind. True ministry is doing what you cannot do with resources that you do not have. True ministry is doing what you cannot do with resources that you do not have. And it is within the community, the fellowship of the church, where big ideas happen, ministries are started, and strategy is implemented. And this is what we should be about. When we're following Christ truly, he's going to place us in water over our heads oftentimes. This keeps us from being puffed up and conceited because we're constantly reminded that it's only him who gives us strength and ability and blesses the work that he gives us to do. People are looking for close, personal, and meaningful relationships in their lives. And there are plenty of places they can turn for that. And there are ways that we foster that in the church, and it's through community. Are you part of that community? Or are you on the fringes? So what are some ways that we can foster community? You personally, what are some ways that you can foster community? Well, number one, you can participate in small groups. That's always helpful. That gets you to know some more people in the church. Number two, take a guest to lunch after church. Wouldn't that be exciting to get to know somebody that you don't know before? Number three, host a dinner at your home with people that you don't know well and get to know them. Number four, encourage the church to host fellowship opportunities. And what I mean by that, when the church has these, show up, participate, be a part of that. And then let me introduce you to number five. It's called the 5-minute rule. What's the 5-minute rule? Here's what I want you to do. Only talk to people that you do not know for the first 5 minutes after the church service is over. See who you meet and get to know this Sunday. You never know what God's going to do with that. Now, in our next session, we're going to explore that fourth purpose of the church, service, and how fellowship, how service can be pursued by us as a congregation. Right now, just take a few moments with your leader and make sure you got all your blanks filled in. And after that, go through the discussion questions together. Make any appropriate notes for yourself, things you need to remember. Then I'd like for the group to spend some time together praying for our Lord's work in our lives, our church, and the lives of our neighbors. Pray that you might be a part of a lively group that fellowships in community together. God bless you.